You have two eyes, huh? Do you understand the game a bit? Yeah, have a look.
I'm not saying anything to you in particular because I know you're not too accurate with your reporting.
That's what you paid
so you're
for.
Saying I should resign. So you're saying I should resign?
I think
that's
you
your
should,
opinion. Is that right?
That's my
opinion.
opinion.
Fine.
Are you going to resign then?
No, of course I'm not going to resign.
Let's simplify things next time.
Well, you know what I've always said about football? Full 90 minutes at senior level is completely overrated. Who needs it? Who needs it? Because Tilio and Kuol was responsible for the most exciting Socceroos moment since Macedonia received the ball on the half turn 25 metres out in 2015. What an assist. The Cumdog on the score sheet. Everything's rosy. We're winning the World Cup, lads. Welcome to TNC. The full squad's back in action, except for that random bloke from Sydney. How are we, gents?
Going well. I mean, that random bloke from Sydney and I had a very nice chat last week.
Well, Joey, the brand strength was at an all-time high this afternoon for you as you staked your reputation going forward on the performance of Harrison Delbridge, and thankfully, him being caught in possession did not cost the Socceroos a goal. Did your life flash before your eyes?
Yes. It legitimately did. I legit, I had an error from Delbridge, and I was like, I looked up from my writing and I was like, oh God, oh no, please, oh no. Look, we got it sorted.
Teo Pellizzeri is with us this evening. Teo, how did you enjoy the action from Eden Park after 2 games of rugby the previous day?
Affectionate greetings to all watching and listening to TNC. I was very busy. I was in an Optus this afternoon, not just doing a fair dealing package, but a match report as well. And it's amazing how much you actually get to sit back and appreciate and watch the game when it is played at a snail's pace, like the first 30 minutes, in which absolutely nothing featured in either the report or the package. But you know what? This game had so many good things come out of it as it went on. Maybe a palate cleanser to make us forget about just how dire that first 40 minutes was. But, you know, I actually thought that we had some very interesting takeaways, which I'm looking forward to getting into as we discuss all the details in depth, as we want to do here on TNC.
Nick Tabano is with us tonight as well. I'm noticing some regrowth. Not quite Jamie McLaren levels, but we're starting to look like the face that we know and love.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a bit of a constant on a Sunday because every Monday morning I'm just going to have to shave again. So it's sort of this is where the road ends, at least for the time being. But yes, it's good to be back.
Isn't it like Homer Simpson, where in the animation he shaves, but then it just pops straight back onto his face?
I wish I could walk into work tomorrow and just pop back up again, and they just. But anyways, it's all good. But no, it's good to be back. Unfortunately, couldn't jump on last week, but back. We got as you said, Josh. We got basically everyone back except for that one guy in Sydney who only shows up when he wants to. So here we are, and looking forward to this.
Oh, to be fair, he was holding down 50% of the fort last week. But Nick, I'm struck by your. I guess the corporate sacrifices that you have to make these days. It's like we saw in the 90s all of those kind of cubicle movies about those guys who are depressed by and beaten down by their office jobs. Is this, your sacrifice of your individuality to the corporate machine?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, no one's ever actually told me, you have to shave. It's just...
they don't have to tell you, Nick. They don't have to tell you to repress your identity. That's what's so insidious about it.
I'm not going to go into it.
He's clearly doing the "How do you do, fellow kids" Steve Buscemi move by wearing the backwards cap here. It's reminding us all that he's down with the youth, Backstreet Boys, or whatever.
I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest one here. I'm the youngest one here.
Are you saying? Hang on, are you laying claim to being young boy there, Nick?
No, I am the. Am I just the honorary young boy for the evening? No, I mean. I
thought backwards caps was my thing, and head wear was
because
my deal.
all right. My hair was all over the place. I saw where it was. There's something needed to change. Otherwise, I would have looked like the guy off the receptionist off Ghostbusters that has the glasses and the hair all up like this. When I had my glasses on before, I looked like that.
My point about Buscemi stands. He's making a reference to a 40-year-old movie.
I'm not even going to contest that. I'm
See,
not,
Nick,
there's
this
no
is
point.
just proof. This is proof we can bully you about anything. So we've had issue of the week, and we had leading teams, and we agreed on what's out of bounds. But you see, nothing's off limits once we get on a roll, mate. So
Teo, by the end of this, I think we're going to need a patch-up coffee. The way that things are going right now. So
hang on, you don't get us sued. There might be intellectual property or copyright laws around the patch-up coffee.
If I speak, I'm not going to go into it too much. But anyways, yes, it's his decision. The facial hair's gone for the time being, so we're going clean shaven for now, and you guys are just all going to have to get used to it. Too bad.
Well, terrified of losing relevance for a minute or two, Joey Lynch has put on a very attention-seeking hat, so I'll go to him with the first question. Speaking of young boys, how did the young boys do today against New Zealand? It was a changed lineup.
Indeed. Well, I'll change the banner, so we'll go to game 2 first, and I'm going to lose the hat because I can't hear anything through the headphones. But
how'd the young boys do, Joey?
Yes. It was a tale of two halves in this game. I thought the first half it was sort of a continuation of the frustrating, dour sort of football we saw in game 1. But then the second 45 minutes occurred, and there was a bit of a shift in tactics. We saw the Australians pressing a bit higher up the pitch. They were more aggressive in getting in the Kiwis' faces and pressing, which, there's a difference between physicality and tactics. And I think that was a tactical shift, not just simply getting stuck in a little bit more, but it generally seemed to work. Whereas in the first half, especially the positions that Australia was losing the ball in was dictating how the game was played. Australia had more possession in the first half, but most of the territory was also in their own half. In the second half, it was the Kiwis that were losing the ball in worse areas, and that dictated the ebb and flow of the game, and that opened up, and it just in general, it allowed the Socceroos to play a bit more football and look more threatening, but it also gave them a bit more confidence, I felt, and just a bit more verve to their play. Looking in that opening stanza, not only was it disappointing to see, and there were some basic skill errors that were, not good enough at an international level. I think a lot of that probably had down to do with the fact that the players just weren't feeling it for whatever reason. They were a bit whether it's lacking in confidence, lacking in cohesion, just didn't believe in what they were doing. I'm not sure what it is, but it felt like there was I sort of felt, and I wrote in my match report, it sort of felt like in the second 45 minutes when they were told to press higher, get in the Kiwis' faces a bit more, it sort of felt like they were playing with more belief. The coaching staff had put more belief in them, and they responded in kind.
Joey, is it a case of the Socceroos played more football in the second half, or they just had pacier and more powerful approaches to how they went about the game? I think the main tactical observation that Andy Harper had as the analyst that was doing the play-by-play next to Robbie Thompson was that we just set our stall higher up the pitch and took a bit more risk, pressing from a bit further up. We saw Marco Tilio, who had that shocking miss, re-engage with the game quite capably because he was taking up more advanced positions and becoming a physical presence, and he got subbed off shortly after getting that yellow card. But are we sure it was actually a football-based solution, or was it simply a greater level of PNP after being told to be more physical at halftime?
I mean, it can be both. It could have been a football-based decision that allowed the Socceroos to take advantage of their P&P a bit more. The P&P advantage would have existed and probably did exist in the first half as well. It's just that the approach, the way that they were set up, let's face it, it was a Graham Arnold Socceroos team. There was a level of conservatism, pragmatism, and aversion to risk, and they weren't able to exploit that P&P advantage. And there was the shift in the second half, and we saw more of that allowed to come to the fore. So it doesn't have to be an either-or. It can be one begets the other.
I mean, to expand on that, I think Graham Arnold's teams and his entire coaching career and the success or otherwise of his sides has been dictated by where his team wins the ball. And his teams have only ever been able to reliably create chances if they win the ball high up the pitch. sometimes just after they've lost it, but sometimes via pressing. You look at Aylwin Bill's goal in the first game, winning the ball high up the pitch. You look at most of the good opportunities and play that Australia developed in the first 15 minutes of the second half, winning the ball high up the pitch. So that begs the question, what on earth were we doing setting up where we did with our central midfielders, 30 yards deep in our own territory? Why were we letting the New Zealand centre-backs dwell on the ball at all?
I think the one thing that struck me about that first half as well was, I mean, when you looked at how New Zealand set up with that back five, with the way that we were playing in sort of that front three in the midfield, it was never going to be conducive to actually picking apart a back five that was quite well organised, I must say, in that sense, because we know Mitchell Duke's a bit more of a battering ram, thrives in P&P situations, in chaotic situations like we saw in the second half. But in that first half, when you need players to come and receive the ball, someone more like of the ilk of Cummings, the ball was kind of rebounding off of Duke. He wasn't able to bring the ball under control. The midfield wasn't able to get into the game as much, I thought. I saw some criticism for Denny Genre. I thought that was a bit unwarranted. I don't think he was necessarily the worst one out there, especially in the second half. I thought he really upped it. But I just think in that first half, there was just, I don't know if just the lineup was conducive to what the Socceroos actually wanted to do. Because, Josh, what were they actually trying to do? Were they aiming to maybe have more, having someone genre deeper, trying to control possession and knock it out to the flanks and get players like Tilio and Lecky into the game? Because Tilio was anonymous in the first half, bar that miss. I mean, I felt, his response in the second half when there was more impetus shown and Australia was able to get on the ball and there was a bit more chaos, Tilio just absolutely thrived in those situations. But when, the midfield weren't able to pick apart the defenses and get Tilio into space or get him into one-on-ones, he was basically a passenger, and it wasn't his fault. It was just the way that we were playing in that first half. So in terms of response, I got to say, I think the changes as well of bringing on someone like Cam Devlin as well really just solidified things in midfield a little bit more. I really rated Devlin's game when he came on, just breaking things up a little bit more. You mentioned the P&P. Maybe that's what we needed in that second half, just someone to offer a little bit more in that midfield, because I don't know if Metcalf and McGree and Genre as a three, considering they all have different attributes, I don't know if they are sort of a functional trio in the middle of the park, in my opinion. I think Metcalf and McGree brings quite similar traits, and it was just looked like they weren't on the same wavelength. Genre was sitting so far back, and as you mentioned, Josh, he was basically sitting where the two centre backs were. He should have been getting forward. As we saw in that second half, he was able to get forward and put the defence under pressure. He actually looked pretty good. There were a few plays when he actually nutmegged it as well. So,
oh, Nick, you were so close. The microphone door, microwave door was open, and then there was the beeping of the machine, and then the door slammed shut, and we've almost got you back. Famous last words. There he goes. So following on from, we'll get into the second half midfield in a bit, but I wanted to talk about Tilio because it seemed as though everyone wants Tilio to succeed because we've seen the potential and we've seen the talent and he's an exciting player. So I will preface this by saying that, do we think that everyone was just a bit too apologetic for that miss, saying he's rusty, hasn't played much, the A-League off-season is really long? I mean, what's the relationship like for Graham Arnold and the A-League clubs for these teams that have been knocked out of the Australia Cup in some instances more than a month ago? I mean, we believe that Marco Tilio is probably training 5-6 days a week, 7 days a week, maybe if he was at a different A-League men's club round the clock. I mean, how can we say that's rust? I know it's the pressure of a game situation and it's always going to be different to training. Is there something stopping, I know the horse is bolted on this, but was there something stopping Graham Arnold from bringing those Australian players into their own domestic camp? So maybe getting them released from A-League men's preseason and actually going into a camp of just A-League based players to train against each other? Is that against FIFA rules? I'm sure, someone more litigious would know, but I just feel as though it was a bit too much of a soft landing and a bit too apologetic for what was essentially a concentration break and a technical mishap. And if we're only going to get one chance against France or against Denmark, it needs to hit the back of the net. It can't be that.
I mean, I can imagine it might have something to do with unbundling and APL versus Football Australia. Mr. Kisnorbo, I'm going to take three of your starting 11 and for 2 or 3 weeks, on the eve of the season. I imagine that probably wouldn't have gone down well. But on your Tilio point, I agree that he certainly bounced back. But yeah, that sort of miss, when I saw that miss happen, you immediately start doing the permutations, all right? Because I think Tilio is probably, I don't think I'd get any objections in saying that Tilio is absolutely perhaps the biggest bubble player in this squad. He is very much on the edge of selection versus non-selection. And I immediately began thinking, well, you've got that miss, and now he's probably going to go back to Melbourne City. And let's face it, looking at that team, Lecky, McLaren, Naboot, Florent Bernier, they've just brought in Valon Berisha now. I don't see him starting week in and week out.
But the thing is, he's got 47 appearances and still fewer starts than appearances as a sub. And does anyone in this chat think that's going to change this season? It's almost like
and that's the point.
We're almost trying to get him to the World Cup to get him sold overseas. That seems to be. And I'm sure Melbourne City will turn a neat little profit out of it. So, don't think I'm trying to sell him off at a flogging. But, isn't that kind of for the benefit of the Socceroos what we're hoping for here, really?
Well, I was saying that. I saw that miss and I was thinking that miss, regardless of how he bounced back, could end up pushing him to the other side of the bubble, purely because he's not going to get a ton of opportunities at A-League men level to make us forget that.
Can I just say 2 points on Tilio, one really quickly, about Melbourne City when he comes back? I think the one thing that works in his favour is, and we know how Kisnorbo, especially with players arriving late in the transfer window, he hasn't always just sort of thrusted them in. And because there are 6 games leading into the World Cup, it might actually work well for Tilio in the sense that Berisha might not be thrusted in straight away. And Tilio has started every single, I think, from what I can remember, almost every single preseason game so far. So maybe there is an opportunity for him to start as one of those that midfield pairing with Florent Berengay, at least for the time being. So that might work well for him. But also his response in the second half was very positive, because a lot of young players and a lot of players in general, after a miss like that, heads drop. You mentioned it, Joey. All thoughts going through his head. Oh my God, I've just squandered a great opportunity to put myself on the score sheet and basically book a ticket to Qatar. What am I going to do now? What sort of response? So a credit to him and his mentality to be able to bounce back in that moment and get over it quickly over halftime. It almost like it happened at a good time. Just before halftime, gets 15 minutes to just reset, put it to the back of your mind and go, all right, I've now got 15, 20. I think he played 20 or 25 minutes in the second half. After that, he put that behind him and he was brilliant. So I got to say, to his credit, he responded fantastically. And I think as well, when that first game rolls around against Western United in 2 weeks' time, I actually think he's going to start that opener only on the fact that, knowing the track record of how Kisnorbo has put his sides out, he doesn't like to change things too much at the start. What he's gone with in preseason, I think is what he's going to go with match day 1. So Tilio starting alongside Berengay and maybe Valon Berisha coming off the bench is more likely. So maybe for those 6 games, maybe he might actually get more minutes than we think.
I'm not so sure. Valon Berisha came in, and they normally take longer to hit the ground, but Valon Berisha came in talking about how he'd done a full preseason.
Sure, but he hasn't been playing games. Yeah, that's the thing.
Neither's Tilio. So, and I always thought that the biggest thing that Kisnorbo kept players out of the squad wasn't footballing stuff. It's just aerobic capacity. Kisnorbo's pre-seasons are famous for absolutely smashing players on the training track and running, and he wants players to have this massively high cardiovascular capacity. So I always figured that was the biggest impediment to him playing foreigners. Not so much the footballing aspects, but more so, I don't think it's going to surprise anybody, talking about Patrick Kisnorbo, less the footballing ability and more the P&P aspects, the cardiovascular capacity. So
but how do we know what Valon Berisha's cardiovascular ability is, though, right now? Like that, we obviously don't know.
Well, we don't.
As much
we don't know Marco Tilio's. We don't know Tilio's either. What I'm saying is you can't give Tilio as much of the benefit of the doubt, given that Berisha arrived having done a full preseason, a longer preseason, and more training than Tilio did, given that the French league came back earlier.
I want to throw out there the biggest positive. Maybe it's a debate, but are we saying it's Garang Kuol or are we saying it's Cummings? Because I think given the one criticism of Garang Kuol, at least from Nick Stoll when he's been on this program, is he's played X number of minutes. He's not started a senior game. Are we at the point where that doesn't matter and the sample size has become irrelevant because the role we're taking him to the World Cup for, if he does indeed go, is basically going to be what we see today? And it has been, I threw out there pre-show on social who wants to be the contrarian among us. But the one response I did get privately was Garang Kuol has trained against Storm Roux and knows he's got him covered for speed. He was fresh off the bench. Storm Roux had played the entire game and he knew he could take him. Putting that aside, I still thought it was the most, as Josh said off the top, the most exciting 30 seconds of football that the Socceroos have given us in years. Not least because of the save, the handball, and then hitting the crossbar, but just the fact that Garang had the audacity to take the game on in such a fashion. And when it comes to creating more than one moment a game, which is what we might be limited to against France and Denmark, he's the guy to make something happen. And I couldn't have been more pleased with his contribution, and he absolutely has to go, I would say.
Well, it's also, that was Storm Roux, not Furland Mendy. So that's another factor that you've got to take into account with this sort of thing. But the way that I saw Garang, the way that I saw Garang's role this series, I didn't think Garang could secure himself a place in Qatar in this series, but I thought he could lose his place in Qatar, if that makes sense. I think if he didn't perform the way that he did today, Arnold would have drawn a line through him saying, all right, took him into a national camp, wasn't up to it. That can be the next bloke's problem. The fact that he's performed well now, I think, has probably moved him close to, a much closer to the front of the line than he was. However, at this stage, I don't think you can just... if he goes out, what happens if he goes out and he doesn't score a single goal for the Mariners?
But here's the thing. Should he even start for the Mariners, or is his best shot of going to the World Cup to continue to use these 6 games in a super sub role?
I don't think he needs to start for the Mariners because, as you said, that's not the role that he's going to take. Would I prefer him to? Yes, I see lots of comparisons to Daniel Arzani. Who's probably getting a bit disrespected because people like to give him a clip for some reason whenever they bring up Garang that's needless, but he was starting games week in and week out, and that's preferable with Melbourne City. However, I don't think Garang needs to start. Garang needs to score. Garang cannot hope for selection in the World Cup. As exciting as this cameo was, in my opinion, I don't think he can come back to the Mariners and not score a single goal and then expect to get selected, even with the extended squad. I don't think you can, unless Arnold's just going full effort mode. I'm at it here afterwards anyway. Wants to help make him a millionaire.
Sorry, I thought you meant effort, EFFORT, not effort.
Effort.
Because we're already going full effort mode. That's the DNA.
EFF.
Is that distinct from performance mode or preparation mode?
Oh, sorry, you've triggered me, Josh.
No, but yeah. I think coming into this series, Garang could have drawn a line through his name. He didn't. But I still think he has to score goals in the A-Leagues to get a gig in Qatar.
I don't think it matters. I think Kuol has shown that it doesn't matter what's ahead of him. He's going to play the same way. He's going to approach it the same way. I don't think, Joe, you brought up it's Storm Roux and it's not Phil and Mendy or whoever, but everything throughout Garang Kuol's, very short career to date suggested that what's in front of him doesn't matter. He's just not daunted by the stage. So that's why I think we have to take him, because who else but what else but the folly of youth to propel Australia's World Cup chances? Everyone knows we're screwed. Everyone knows we're going to get thumped in Qatar. Garang Kuol doesn't. Garang Kuol. Because Garang Kuol doesn't, it's just never tell him the odds,
Well, let me ask you a question, Josh. So, come down to the season, comes down to Garang Kuol or Marco Tilio. Tilio.
Why does it have to be either or? I reject.
Why can't we take both?
It's a hypothetical.
Why can't we take both?
Okay, well,
it's a hypothetical.
Well, if you're going to box me in, I'm going to say
Garang Kuol hasn't scored. Tilio's got 3 goals and 3 assists.
Oh
Who are you
well,
taking?
you got to go with form because if it's based on the opening rounds of the A-League, you got to go with form because this is a mental thing where you need a young player who's just on a hot streak. So if one of the two guys outperforms the other, but I don't think it has to be either or. I don't think you can put a limit on the kinds of, dare I say, X factor players that we could bring off the pine in Qatar.
And
Can
I
I
think in terms of leaving sorry, Nick, in terms
No,
of
go,
leaving
Sam.
a legacy, I think Australia, the Australia administration, be it the football department or the overall machine, are acutely aware that having Kuol play at this World Cup has a far greater potential of leaving a legacy. I'm not going to entertain Joey. I also reject your premise of Tilio versus Kuol, but I don't believe that they're unaware of the big picture of this being the administration that launched him onto the world stage. And I think they all see the opportunity to enhance their legacy by being responsible for it.
Can I just say one thing, just to play contrarian here about what Garang Kuol needs to do to make it? I don't think Garang Kuol needs to score goals. If he has 3 match-winning appearances where he's playing a match-winning role off the bench and setting up other players per se, and say winning games for the Mariners in different ways, I don't think we should be putting it in a small box and saying he needs to hit a certain parameter by scoring goals, because he's not a striker as well. He's a winger, for God's sake. Like, this is the thing. Like, I don't think goals is a fair kind of thing to put. It's not like it's, say, Jason Cummings or another striker. He's a winger who's had a lot of match-winning impacts, coming off the bench and just going at defenders, drawing defenders out, playing those balls, whether it's the final assist or it's the hockey assist. At the end of the day, his work that he does when he gets forward and attacks defenders is what makes him great. It's not his final product per se or scoring goals. Yeah, he's had some match-winning performances in terms of goals last A-League season. But say in these 6 games, he has 4 cameos off the bench where he actually comes on and just completely changes the game with what he does when he's running at players and causing all sorts of chaos. I think that's enough. And also on top of that, I think just in terms of Kuol and Tilio, if I had it my way in terms of taking as much X factor as possible, Josh, you mentioned it. We know we're screwed anyway. Take as much X factor as possible with Kuol and Tilio. Put them both on the plane and see what they can do. Because, look, you know what? Like, there's a good chance that after 2 games, our tournament might be over. I'm not saying it definitely will be. We might jag some points. But, I mean, if there's an opportunity there for these guys to put themselves out there, why not? Why not take them both instead of, taking guys who might not be able to provide that same X factor? So, honestly, I'm firmly in the camp of fitting them both in if you can.
And he didn't score, or it's worth remembering, he didn't score or assist today, and he's the talk of the game. So
Yeah.
He effectively assisted.
Well, not really, because McGree's shot was saved, and then Cummings' shot came after that. So,
I think we're getting bogged down in
3
semantic
players
here
touched
surrounding
the ball
goals
after he
versus
did.
assist versus match winning. Basically, he's got to make an impact in the A-League men's
absolutely.
season. He
But
can't
that's good.
rely
But that's
on.
good. We've talked him down from having to score to get on the plane to making an impact. I think that's a win, Joey.
Look, if it's goal, if
I think it's semantics.
If
Kuol,
it's goals,
coin to the moon. Kuol coin to the moon.
if it's goals and assists that's going to get you there, Craig Goodwin
that's
plays
Craig
match day 1. He's going to get on the plane. He's going to score 6 goals and get 6 assists. And we may as well then, if we're going to look at goals, we look at all the players who score a lot of goals in the lead-in. So I don't know. I think match-winning impacts and performances like that, instead of looking at goals, because Daniel Arzani didn't score every week. He had a lot of match-winning performances and really, really, really exciting performances in those like 60-minute cameos, or I don't think he really ever got through 90 minutes, but when he would play in those minutes, he'd be unbelievable and he'd be taking on players and showing no fear. I think we're going to do the same with Kuol.
If he does it.
If
Not, you can't take it for granted.
No.
Just like with anybody.
If he continues this same trajectory, I'm saying the next 6 games and follows on with this momentum.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he can't, he won't get picked off this performance, but he's got to back it up.
I think he will. So the 2 guys that did actually score, Mitch Duke and Jason Cummings, how much are they? Duke's going regardless, but how much is Cummings now an ever-present threat to the establishment, even maybe some of the ones who were sent home and or sent back to their clubs early and didn't have to play in this friendly? Is it time to talk about Cummings and exactly whose spot is he coming for? Because I do think the head-to-head Cummings or someone else conversation is far more relevant to how we compose our 26.
I mean, on Duke, I think Duke starts against France. I'm not saying I would, but I think Duke. You can tell the Socceroos are going to sit back. They're going to play on the counter at that game. It's going to be sort of like a repeat of the Japan game. Arnold's going to want that battering ram.
This is what I hate about the whole the Duke proposition is he's not effective when the team doesn't have the ball. Duke is effective.
But he's used in that role.
I'm not
defending it.
Yes, but he can't exploit the space in behind the defense. So Australia ends up getting bogged down just as they were against Peru. I think Duke has a point to his international career. There is a use case for Duke, and that is when we are playing against a team what we need to beat, and we can't generate any chances because we can't play football, and we need to sling the ball into the box. So that when the other team is sitting behind the ball and we're slowly getting compressed, and we just need a way through because we can't pick our way through. But when we're playing as the underdog against a team like France or in the Peru game, for example, Duke, I think, is an entirely ineffective proposition, and therefore I don't think he should go to the World Cup because there are no games in which, maybe Tunisia, where his strengths can be of use.
In my opinion, it's more of a question is because, let's be real. Looking at the striker options, the strikers that got picked for these two games, it was Duke, Cummings, McLaren, and Taggart. Now, can they fit 4 strikers in 26 spots, or will they only take 3? What are your thoughts? Do we think that all 4 are going to go? Because honestly, I think Cummings and Taggart, for me, if I was picking it, I'd have them as nailed on selections, and then picking out of Duke or McLaren. But knowing history and knowing what we've spoken about so many times in this podcast, you'd almost think Duke and McLaren are probably more likely than anyone to get on the plane because of the fact that they've played so much, and then more than likely Taggart ahead of Cummings. But Cummings' audition today was unbelievable. I think you can't not take him after that.
I've said this about A-League games, though. Cummings' use of his body and ability to protect the ball is just a different level to what we see week in, week out, game in, game out, player in, player out in the A-League. And maybe it's not the worst thing that we're just going to have a straight-up boat race in these 6 games. Whoever looks the best gets the nod. And it would be super harsh on McLaren, given all the heavy lifting he's done over the course of the qualifying campaign. But if Cummings is peaking and he's not, then it adds such a layer of intrigue to the start of the A-League season.
Well, what has Jamie McLaren ever done for the Socceroos against a blue-chip opponent? Or even a mid.
What has any of the current squad done against a blue chip opponent?
Well, that's true. That's true. I mean, Taggart's had some moments, but
using that logic, Josh, Risdon should be back in. Really, right back. No, I'm being dead serious.
Yeah. Honestly, I think there is a case for that, but he's well out of the national team picture at this point. Hasn't got a look in, so it's not going to happen. It's probably a waste of breath. But I think McLaren has a tendency to go missing in games, and he can't operate with his back to goal. Yes, he's a good finisher, but will his presence lend itself to a chance falling to him? Is the big question. Maybe against a team like France, he's a good option because we know we're going to be on the back foot. We're going to be sitting deep, and there might be space to exploit him behind. He's, for all his failings, Jamie McLaren is quick. But I don't really see him as part of my 3 if we're only taking 3.
Well, you need to look at it. You also need to look at what Arnold has said in the past when you're trying to figure this out. And you come back to that comment, McLaren and Cummings are the same sort of striker that he made. Obviously, he got, shouted down quite rightly. However, that does that give an insight into Graham Arnold's thinking that it's Cummings versus McLaren, sort of in his mind, and they're competing for the same sort of role in Arnold's system? We know what Duke can do. Duke is a battering ram. He's full of Aussie DNA, yada, yada, yada. Adam Taggart is clearly the most incorporative centre forward that the Socceroos have. He brings dynamics that the other players can't. He's important for that sort of stuff. Is that third role, regardless of whatever Arnold sees it as, down to Cummings versus McLaren? So if you're talking about a horse race, Teo, I think the horse race, especially considering that the J-League season will be ending, is between McLaren and Cummings based upon what we have previously seen and heard from Graham Arnold.
Do we think he did enough today, or is this just a token appearance?
No. It's like Kuol. He certainly could have guaranteed that he wouldn't be going to Qatar today, but he didn't do that. He scored. He got about it. So he's clearly kept the door ajar, depending upon his domestic form season. I think.
I think his form in this 6 games is far more relevant than it is Kuol's. It's convenient that they're in the same team, though, because hopefully that means they can feed off each other.
Yeah, and I think as well, look, as mentioned, I think Cummings couldn't have done any more today, unless score another 2 or 3 more goals. But either way, he still did all he could in that 20-25 minutes he was on the pitch. And I really hope that he does go to the World Cup, because I think along with Taggart, they're the 2 strikers who have the most complete sort of game. You know, if we're talking about hold up play, presence in the box, finishing, everything else. For me, it's a no-brainer to take them, but it's, you know, it all comes down to hierarchy and trusted soldiers for Graham Arnold at the end of the day. Like who, in that sense, like putting yourselves in his shoes and what he's done in his track record, then I mean, it's probably more than likely that Mitchell Duke's already got a spot on the plane, and then it's okay. How many others are going to go? And I think Jason Cummings should be going. If he has an unbelievable 6 games, even an unbelievable 3 or 4, I think he's got to go.
Well, I mean, just quickly before we move on, because I know Taylor said so, I'm looking at the Central Coast Mariners fixture right now. So they open the season with a home derby against the Jets, and they've got the Phoenix, Glory, Western United, Western Sydney Wanderers, MacArthur, and then the league breaks for the World Cup.
I can see 12 points minimum there, I reckon.
Regardless of points and wins and all of that sort of stuff, going off last season, the only real, proper stout defense they're going up against is Western United. You can easily see, I mean, the Newcastle
4 games
Jets,
at home as well, Joey. 4 games at home too.
The Jets' defensive foibles were well known. The Phoenix, bit in flux. Perth Glory, defensive foibles well known. Western Sydney Wanderers at this point have completely lost the benefit of the doubt about anything football related until they prove otherwise. MacArthur, spoke about it with Stoll on the show last week. Looks like they'll be very good moving forward. Defensively, still question marks over that. I mean, Joe Guest's Galazzo against them in the Cup, and the way that the Cannons were able to move the ball against them in the Cup. So looking at their fixture, it's certainly put it this way, if Cummings and or Kuol do not produce enough game-breaking performances during the A-League season to justify selection, they can't blame a massively strong, a massively difficult schedule.
Potentially unanswerable questions here. Is Jason Cummings' dog named after Roberto Carlos or Carlos Alberto? That's what I want to know.
Was that a comment? Was that a comment from the crowd? Or
No, that was me.
Oh, okay.
I'll take responsibility for that one. Thrillhouse X says, "Can we get an F in the chat for Langerak? Poor bloke." I pity Langerak going back
was
through.
asked about that post game. Basically, sort of said that Langerak's playing week in and week out in the J League. We know what we're going to get with Langerak. It was good to have him back in camp. He wanted to get a look at Redmayne because obviously Redmayne hasn't played much competitive football since the Peru games.
Well, this is a great.
I'm not defending what he said.
No. This is a great lead-in to Scott McDonald's criticism after the game in Brisbane, which was, why have we gone with 2 totally different 11s? Why aren't we seeing what the new faces can do to gel and combine with some of the nailed-on players that are going to the World Cup? And talking about Redmayne versus Langerak, this is the reacquaintance that Langerak absolutely needed. I mean, did Arnie not watch the Oakley Cannons not knock Andrew Redmayne out of the Australia Cup? I mean, how many more games do you need? He's our third keeper. He's there as basically a mascot. Yeah, well, no, he's there as a break
And the
glass in
penalty
case of
shootout.
emergency if we get to a penalty shootout, or if we're in a group game and we concede a penalty in the last minute and we still have a sub available. I mean, that's what we're looking at with Redmayne. Why wouldn't you bring in Langerak? But also, McDonald's point, which I think was a very good one, is why didn't we sprinkle in more of the new faces? And I think the 40 minutes that we had, which was very disjointed and dysfunctional, as you guys have discussed today, against New Zealand, is entirely the product of just throwing it against the wall and seeing if it sticks, rather than a bit of a mix across both. And maybe flying players back to their clubs was a primary motivation of that, rather than taking them to New Zealand. But I don't think that's worth it. We've got a World Cup to prepare for here.
You said a dysfunctional and disjointed 40 minutes, Teo, and I thought you were criticising the opening to this podcast, but...
I would never do that. You might have noticed. I don't talk down the product. So.
I did ask that of Arnold as well. I'm not sure whether he didn't understand the question because I prattled on a bit too much, or he just didn't want to give an answer. But he insisted that he took benefits from both games. It was very valuable, and yes, he didn't seem to share any of the thoughts of Scott McDonald or Alex Brosk on today's broadcast, either questioning the decision.
Well, for those that didn't watch the postgame, Brosk said he questioned exactly what Australia would have got out of this two-match series. And as Jess also mentioned in the YouTube comments, why New Zealand? Why an opponent of this strength? I mean, when the friendly was booked, was the time to ask this, by the way. I think it's great that Broski got on the front foot with a bit of harsher critique, not criticism, critique of the strategy around preparing for the World Cup. But the time to really ask that was when we knew this window was coming and New Zealand hadn't been announced yet. And I feel as though as our media, both podcasts, independent, but also mainstream, matures a bit, we learn to ask these questions ahead of time so that there's a bit more pressure from the media not to book a two-game series against New Zealand, not to put the friendly in Brisbane where the crowd's not great for a World Cup farewell, but actually to seek out who we potentially could have played. I guess the UEFA Nations League doesn't help because it preoccupied all of the European opponents in this particular window. But New Zealand times two, as much as we did them a favour, they hadn't played at home in 5 years. I think it was a very valid criticism from Brosk to bring up, and a very welcome one. I guess the next step is the timing of when you drop it. It has to be before that media release came out announcing that it was New Zealand.
Can I be very cynical? New Zealand might have been the best / most commercially viable opponent they could have got out to Australia in the window. They might have been able to get better opponents, but they probably might have been in Europe.
But what are other teams in the AFC doing at the moment?
Japan played... Who did they play? I know Ecuador played the Saudis.
Japan played the US, and they're playing Ecuador on Tuesday. So,
but not in Japan.
They played the US in what's the stadium? They played in Germany.
Yeah, exactly. They had to go to Europe.
Yeah.
So they didn't, for lack of a better word, get the box office.
I mean, but to be fair, neither did Australia. What was the crowd in Brisbane? 26, 27,000?
Most of that probably went away when the public holiday was announced and they suddenly had to pay double rates.
I
probably saved money only going to Auckland as well, though.
It's true. I mean, this was ostensibly to tie into the 100th anniversary, and so on. And I would like to have a regular game against New Zealand as part of the calendar.
I'd much rather see it as a junior international, though. It doesn't have to be senior.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, I have found the games I was looking for. Paraguay played the UAE. Iran played Uruguay. Now, Qatar played Canada. So, are we saying that this is just pure logistics and
South Korea played Costa Rica and Korea as well. So, if we're talking about continental travel, I mean, it's not like they would have been all off limits. What was, say, Mexico doing?
Yeah, but then if we play South Korea, then we play
not South Korea, play Costa Rica.
No, but yeah, I guess. I was going to say if we play South Korea, then New Zealand has to play Costa Rica again, and there might be a war. So, I did want to drawn, I guess, the idea that, this was a waste of time, or this second squad that was picked was not, full of players that are realistically going to be part of the picture. Vince coming through saying we would have definitely whinged if we didn't mark the centenary by playing New Zealand, but potentially, such as our want.
I'm hoping that's a we as in other people. I don't think any of us would have minded.
No, but in terms of I've completely forgotten what I was talking about now that Vince's comments popped up. But the second squad, the second 11 being a huge changeover, and rather than trying to incorporate those players, I guess that goes back to Stoll's point on the last episode, that he felt this experimental squad was rather cynically picked to placate those crying out for fresh blood and a change. I mean, do we think, how many of these players that shone today or played today do we realistically think are going to the World Cup?
A few. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah.
Or is it just our hype that we've built up over 15 minutes of Garen Kuol chipping it over somebody's head?
I think do the obvious is actually kind of a safe strategy at this point. Not the only national team that maybe should do it.
I mean, there's one player that we haven't talked about that I think certainly did that case for Qatar. No damage to, and that was Tommy Deng.
Yeah.
One could definitely, Tommy Deng has had a horrific run with injuries over the past few years, but you think back a couple of seasons ago, he's the Olyroos captain. He earned the move to Urawa Red Diamonds, a powerhouse of the J League. He genuinely looked like he was going to become a fixture of this Socceroos squad for years to come. And he's got back in there today. He's playing centre-back next to Harrison Delbridge. And I certainly think that whilst it's inevitable, I think that if both Harry Souttar and Kai Rolls are fit, they will be in the squad, and it will likely be one of those two starting next to Trent Sainsbury, who obviously played poorly against New Zealand in the first game, but I think he's well established at this point and can't see him not starting if fit. But certainly I think Deng, especially considering that we're heading into a World Cup on very short rest, and Deng probably actually might be a better international right back than he is a centre back, but he can play both positions. I certainly think that adaptability and his performance today, the fact that he was Graham Arnold's Olyroos captain in Tokyo, and we know how much Graham Arnold loves to foster that Olyroos to Socceroos connection, genuinely think Tommy Deng might have propelled himself into the discussion alongside the likes of Bailey Wright and Degenek for one of those backup positions at centre-back heading into the World Cup.
I think one thing to keep in mind as well is, you just mentioned it, Joey. He plays right back at club level and he might be a better right back. Versatility is key. Less spots. If players are more versatile, can play multiple positions, I think that's a massive, massive thing working in Thomas Deng's favour.
So I remember you bringing this up a few times, Joey, and I've always disagreed with you. I think Thomas Deng is a centre-back, and I think his athleticism and his agility in that position shines as opposed to him playing at fullback, where his ability on the ball holds him back a little bit. But there was one challenge. I agree he played well today, and there was one challenge that he made. I think it was in the first half, and he scythed somebody down at about waist height, but it was all clean. It was all ball. It was just a magnificent last-ditch challenge, and I thought, wow, this guy's, he's got something. He's got something that our other defenders don't, which is that turn of pace, but also that agility and that maneuverability in those in that way, which a lot of our defenders are quite lethargic, or like Souttar, are built like mag trucks and have the turning circle thereof. So I think he can definitely mount a case. As you say, it depends on fitness. I would have him ahead of Rolls in the pecking order, but Rolls did play in those pressure cooker games. It's probably ahead in Arnold's books. Should we talk about the first game at all? Because we've largely talked about game 2, and game 1 was, I guess, a lot less interesting and a lot more turgid, but still probably meriting of discussion.
One last thing on game 2. Harrison Delbridge. He had one potential catastrophic error in the 68th minute. Terrible sloppy turnover that very easily could have been punished. Aside from that, don't think he disgraced himself at all.
And one foul right on the edge of our own penalty area where he lost the man.
I'm putting a lot of blame on that on the Eden Park surface. There was like a lot of slippage from both players. Players were slipping over each other and slipping over themselves all game. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. Am I saying Delbridge is in contention for Qatar? No, not unless cataclysm strikes the centre back ranks. However, he did not disgrace himself, put in a good shift, and he certainly he will always remain a meme in the eyes of the Australian football public. Although hopefully at some point people will begin to realise that yes, Ben Smith in the comments, Alex Grant would never. Yes, and as I said last week, Alex Grant very stiff to miss out on selection. I'm not denying otherwise. However, Delbridge is actually a decent centre back.
Just a quick point. You mentioned that the slipping and sliding at Eden Park. The good thing is that we spoke about a while ago, or you guys spoke about a while ago when Vince was on, about the rugby game that was played. Was it yesterday or was it the day before? And worries about the pitches. Thank God, at least for now that we know of, there has been no injuries that have come out of that game, because if that pitch was not up to scratch and someone got hurt, my God, that would have been a disaster. So good news that no one got hurt.
The only scare we had was Atkinson, and that seemed to be a falling injury after the impact of a slide tackle, and he got up and played on, so that was okay. But I mean, it looked. They did the ACL test on him when they went out there and looked at his knee, so it was a little bit worrisome for the first 60 seconds or so.
Well, what a victory lap today, not just for Joey, but for that one USL correspondent who tweeted all those years ago about how Harrison Delbridge was a national team contender and got flamed for it. Like, what a red letter day for that man.
Wasn't that like 6 years ago now as well?
So yes, he called it early, but he was eventually right, and I think that's the most important thing. You just have to wait until your hot take is proven correct.
We really need to end up in a group with the United States at a World Cup just to show them that we know ball and they do not. Like, can FIFA just heat up the balls for 2026 and put us in their group?
Can we do a crossover with the American version of TNC on ESPN? Get the American football pundits on here, like not those in gridiron, but like the American soccer pundits on here.
No, but
well.
The thing is, they might have an Englishman on their podcast that says staff as well.
They probably do.
You're all ignoring that the American TNC equivalent is Stephen A. Smith.
Technically our co-worker. So
is it there?
He did do it during the Euros. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember his Euros takes? They were the best. They were the absolute best.
All right, Joey, game 1.
Yeah, this. I went back and forth on this. I got to admit, I was giggling and cackling a little bit during the first half, thinking back to, how this podcast and we got a bit of stick in the aftermath of the tactical masterclass of the Peru game. And then all of a sudden, the penalty shootout, and then all of a sudden, everybody remembered what the Socceroos had looked like prior to that. So going back to that clip that we had after the thing, does anybody want to apologise? But on a more serious note, a non-self-congratulatory wankerish note, I've gone back and forth on this. Like, wasn't ideal, but was anybody actually surprised by what we saw? Like, this was like the way that they were playing. We've seen that before.
No, but this comes back to my point about how poor the crowd was. Have we lost touch with what actually attracts people to games? Is it purely the NRI of the opponent, or are we underestimating the fans? Because normally a game like this would draw a couple of thousand, maybe even 10,000 people to fly from interstate to go to a farewell game. And I don't think that number was anywhere near as much. So they were entirely dependent on locals. And was the stay away factor because the team effectively had to go down the path of a meme, Grey Wiggle, Andrew Redmayne. Hey, great for publicity, but was it really great for publicity when you have 24,000 empty seats at Suncorp for our farewell game? And were the fans actually voting with their feet? Because, Joey, you're right. No one was surprised about how we played.
Also, didn't help that Jetstar and Qantas are basket cases at the moment, so anybody wanting to fly to Brisbane probably couldn't.
Their flight's very expensive at the minute as well.
Yeah.
But what do we think of the publicity tour with Gus Hiddink randomly showing up? I mean, I guess Chelsea appointed a new manager too quickly for him to be given the ceremonial caretaker role once again. But so I guess he had a window open up in his schedule that wouldn't have otherwise have been there.
Because Australia wasn't the host broadcaster today, so we didn't get anywhere near as many bench cutaways as we did in Brisbane. But the bench cutaways in Brisbane, how sure are we that Gus isn't coaching the team or behaving exactly the same way he was when he did coach the team, and the dynamic between him and Arnie is only just matured? I mean, he seemed to be doing a lot of chatter every time they cut to the bench, which was a lot more on the Brisbane game.
I think that's more just Gus couldn't help himself.
But that's my point. He's back in the chair. It's just by stealth.
Well, Arnold's said that Hiddink won't have a role in the World Cup. So I think it was just, I found it hilarious during the pre-game interview before the Brisbane game when Hiddink was asked about coming in, and apparently he came in and said, the 2006 team that he inherited, they were all headstrong and they loved to get stuck in, and I had to tell them to calm down a little bit and focus on tactics. Sort of like the exact opposite of the Aussie DNA message that has been coming out of the Socceroos for the past several months, and it was immediately brushed over and to focus back on the Aussie DNA. But I'm not going to, of all the things to complain about, I don't think bringing back Gus Hiddink is one of them. Even if it's just as a little Aussie Gus is back.
No, I liked it. But also, as you say, Joey, he said the quiet part out loud, that there are other ways to approach football out there. And we have all resigned ourselves to thinking inside the square until Graham Arnold's tenure comes to an end, so be it. But all of us are pseudo-intellectuals that want to become fully intellectual at this point, because we want the people that actually provide us the football to think perhaps as progressively as we do about it. So my question about the game in Brisbane is, Awer Mabil, he was completely dropped from Cadiz, then he got back and has made some sub appearances. Now he scored this goal. It was a very well taken goal in a game where he again does what he kind of does a lot, which is he's not doing much, he's not impressive, and then he pops up and scores. So you can't really hold that against him. But when we talk about game time in the lead-in to the World Cup, I mean, Cadiz are still in the relegation zone in La Liga. I'm seeing a lot of them at the moment, obviously, now that the games are there to watch on Optus Cheap Plug. But does he have any concerns over his spot in the team or spot in the squad, or is he a nailed-on certainty, regardless of how much game time he gets between now and November?
I think he's gone. The fact that he started that first game, Teo, I think everyone that started that first game is going to be there, and the chances are they're probably going to start the first game as well, barring the return of, say, as Joey mentioned, the defenders Harry Sutar and Kai Rolls, or maybe a few tinkerings here and there. But I think Awer Mabil is locked on. Doesn't matter how much he plays in the lead up, and the fact that he scored today just strengthens his case.
Yeah, I mean that goal sealed his spot if it was ever in doubt. I think he's always been a part of Arnold's plans over the past couple of years. So, he also, I guess, doesn't get the credit for doing some of the less fashionable bits on the pitch. He does a lot of hard work running off the ball, tracking back. I think he's quite a diligent winger defensively, which coaches like. Obviously, fans don't tend to get that excited about it, about tracking your fullback. But maybe for the first 60 or 70 minutes against France, that's pretty important. So I think he'll start against France. I think he's there, regardless of the football he gets.
Looking at that game one side, the only question marks I would have of who starts against France were at the centre-back and the striker positions. I think every other position in that team will start against France. So Ryan, Bajic, Karacic, Moy.
Do you think Karacic starts over Atkinson still? Because Atkinson was pretty good today. I know Karacic has kind of been Arnie's go-to guy recently, but could you see that changing?
Karacic is playing more at Brescia. Atkinson's form in the Scottish Premiership,
hasn't been great.
From all reports, hasn't been great. Karacic is playing in Brescia. I think Karacic gets the nods, especially with him getting the nod against New Zealand and Brisbane. So I think he starts at right back. You'll see Moy, Irvine and Hrustic, and then Mabil, Ains, Boyle flanking. Like I said at the top, I think he'll start Duke against France, but it will be Mabil and Boyle flanking insert number 9 here against Les Bleus.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of criticism for Sainsbury in the comment section, saying his position in the team is protected. He gets the jibes about the son-in-law and this, that, and the other. But Sainsbury's experience and leadership and quality on the ball, I think I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon.
But to play devil's advocate about Trent Sainsbury, would he have started if Harry Souttar or Kai Rolls was fit, or if both of them were fit?
I think Sainsbury starts alongside Souttar. I think it's dead.
That
comes out.
That's the number. Like at the start of when the Socceroos resumed qualifying post-COVID, that was the number 1 centre back pairing, Sainsbury and Souttar. I think that, and Arnold still sees. I think a lot of the dislike for Souttar does come from that perception of bias from him being Graham Arnold's son-in-law. It's sort of like it takes on a life of his own. Is he as good as what he used to be? No. But I don't think he's just been carried along because he's the son-in-law of Graham Arnold. I think that's ridiculous.
Shall we move on from the Socceroos? Any further thoughts?
Well, I just wanted to make, if we're done with Australia, I just wanted to make a quick point on New Zealand. It seems as though it's an open secret that this was Danny Hayes' last game in charge. It was much mentioned that it was their first game at home in 5 years. They have nothing on the horizon for the foreseeable future. And I saw on A-League Reddit today that some of their fans are begging to move to the AFC Confederation after winning a youth tournament this last week, I think scoring 36 goals and conceding none in the OFC. The Phoenix, Ufuk Talay, has a great eye for internationals, and in spite of how uninspiring they were getting knocked out of the cup to MacArthur, I still think they'll be pushing for the top 6 this season. But New Zealand football on the whole, it just seems as though it's checked out, and I think the empty seats at Eden Park today speak to that as well. Now, it's not our problem to solve because the national curriculum is what the Kiwis would do. And due to the time difference with daylight savings started, we couldn't hook in any of our Kiwi guests to pull through until 1 or 2 in the morning on a Sunday, unfortunately. But, I don't know. They were stiff against Costa Rica, but now it's perhaps scratched off the surface and a rather sick animal has been revealed underneath.
I was just going to say, I think it's because this is... Individually, there are a lot of very talented players in this New Zealand team. Some obviously that weren't fit, players like Sarpreet Singh, for instance. And just going through that New Zealand team, they didn't have Marco Rojas this time around. Tommy Smith, who plays overseas. Barbarousse is suspended. They do have a lot of talent out of that team, a lot of talent in that team. I mean, you still got Chris Wood, Elijah Just, I thought was really good. Is it Just or is it Just? Just to make sure, get that correct there. It's Just, isn't it? Just. Okay, Just. They've still got Libby Kakachi.
From Footscray.
Yeah. Matthew Garbett as well. I really liked what I saw from him, especially in the first game. They've got a lot of good players in this team. I think it just, they would see it as another wasted opportunity because every time it's like they hit this, continental qualifier and they always just seem to fall short. And I think they probably would have been expecting a bit more. And I think I saw something, Stephen Hayes spoken a lot about playing a real attacking brand and playing on the front foot and creating a lot of chances and scoring a lot of goals. But I don't think they've scored in open play in quite some time now. I haven't got the exact stat in front of me, but I think it's easily over 2 or 3 games now. So
their finishing was woeful across both games. They really
so they got concerns.
We could be talking crisis here if they just hit the target with a couple of the chances that presented.
Building up on what Teo said and also picking up what Geraldo has been saying on Twitter a lot when looking at New Zealand's senior men's schedule. Hall of shame shout out to anybody saying Australia should go back to the OFC. whenever things get just a little bit hard in Asia. No, Asia is much better circumstances than the OFC, even with the OFC getting a guaranteed spot in the World Cup from 2026 onwards.
I mean, can we look at New Zealand and say that's a similar position to where Australian football would be if we hadn't qualified for the World Cup? It's total disinterest.
I think we'd be a better shot of booking overseas-based friendlies in Europe or Asia, or not South America necessarily. Here's the thing. Is there any buzz in New Zealand? I mean, we're all assuming that there's going to be a massive uptick in football with the Women's World Cup. Am I getting the impression that New Zealand doesn't feel anywhere near as optimistic about what it's potentially going to do for the game over there? Not least because rugby union and netball are so much more dominant, and the population that they occupy is such a greater percentage compared to that of Australia?
I think that's something we should get our New Zealand correspondents to touch on.
Well, that's a hanging question upon the open invitation to Phil Rollo to come onto the pod. So,
I think the lasting legacy is all of the players they managed to nick from us in the lead up to the tournament. That's going to be the legacy of the Women's World Cup in New Zealand. All those signings that they've been able to make. Matt Coleman says,
I'm pouring two out here. I'm pouring one out for Ali Green and for Indy Riley. I just heartbroken.
Matt Coleman checking in from Qatar. Trent has not been playing well enough and definitely not at a high enough intensity in the Qatar Shisha League. Don't think that's the official name to warrant continued selection. Shout out to Shisha. Great.
Shout out to Mint & Co.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything you want to do after a respiratory-based pandemic has swept the world, it's go to a shisha bar.
Yeah, I guess pour one out for shisha, actually. It's probably a less popular activity than it used to be. I want to talk about the Socceroos team of the century. I always feel woefully underqualified to... Lee Broxham robbed, so this is our banner. I always feel woefully underqualified to assess these things, and I think when you're talking about an actual century of football, most people are, because most people haven't been around for it. But the head coach, Gus Hiddink, recently making his national team return, of course. Graham Arnold, Ange Postecoglou, and Riley Rasic are the backroom team, which would be a fiery backroom team to assemble. Jimmy McNabb, Matt Ryan, and Mark Schwartz are the keepers. Scott Chipperfield, Joe Marston, Craig Moore, Lucas Neal, Alex Tobin, Tony Vidmar, and Peter Wilson, the defenders. Midfielders, Mark Bresciano, Brett Emerton, Mila Jedinak, Harry Kuhl, Aaron Moy, and Johnny Warren. And the forwards, John Aloisi, Tim Cahill, Reg Date, John Kosmina, Judy Masters, Alf Quill, and Mark Viduka. Anyone who was stiffed, anybody who shouldn't be there, I have to say a name that sticks out to me as being a little bit out of place is Aaron Moy.
Yeah, I think maybe Paul Ocon, maybe a bit stiff, not to make the team. We've got to bear in mind this was a public vote as well, so based on form, somebody like a Ned Zelic probably unlucky to miss out, but obviously it was a public vote, and there are other factors that
tarnished
play in
his
that.
public reputation,
Yes.
so I think he's only got himself to blame in that regard.
Talented enough to be in there based on resume, but yeah, it was a public vote. I think Gus Hiddink as the coach, maybe. I mean, it depends upon whether or not you can be. This is based on just how high you brought the Socceroos, or whether or not the sustained excellence. I mean, Riley Rasic took Australia to a World Cup as well, and he did it with complete amateurs in 1974. Ange Postecoglou won an Asian Cup, won a major continental championship with this team. Both Rasic and Postecoglou also, and even Arnold, long-standing records of domestic success as well, and developing Socceroos. So I don't think you could have gone wrong. Like I can understand why, especially in a public vote, Gus Hiddink got the role, but you can also talk about potentially coach as well.
Paul Wade, another potential exclusion.
I mean, I think he's an honest goer, but
but I think he certainly would have been close enough. I think for me, Paul Ocon and Ed Zalic are the two that I know that what some people might think about Ned Zelic in terms of his recent reputation and everything else, but as a footballer alone, he's in the best players to have played in the last decade. So is Paul Ocon. I don't see how you can't fit them both. Even Vinny Grella. I want to see.
Neither of them have played in the last decade.
Yeah, but even
century.
someone like, I know Vinny Grella had a lot of injuries, but I mean, he certainly has to be in amongst it as well.
I think maybe Charlie Yankos is stiff. He wasn't in there, which is a famous name, famous goal. Do we think these things are a worthwhile exercise?
Like it's a Hall of Fame thing, but you know.
Yeah. I mean, like some of the comments are saying Robbie Slater as well. Yeah, Robbie Slater.
Yeah.
Polarizing figure as a media
absolutely.
pundit, as a player, Premier League winner, great tenure with the Socceroos and playing club football in France. I mean, probably not team of the century quality, but somebody that doesn't get a lot of shout out. Somebody like an Eddie Krenchevich. Played for the Socceroos, scored goals for the Socceroos, was the first ever Australian to win a golden boot in Europe with Anderlecht in the Belgian league. So, yeah, I think that is what the value of these team of the centuries do. They generate discussion. They get us talking about the Socceroos and talking about Australian football, not just in terms of a sugar hit or things like that, or just short-term stuff, but acknowledging the long and the proud history that this Socceroos team has, and acknowledging the importance that it holds and the legacy that it has. And I hope you can see what I'm getting at here. You know, it's a recognition that, you know, stealing Diddlitz's line, football belongs.
I also think it's a great way of re-engaging generations that may have only recently discovered the internet but have lost touch with the Socceroos, and they might see, you know, new dawners, as they would call them, or noobs, coming in and just trying to fill the team with golden generation or even modern Socceroos and saying, well, what about X, Y, Z? And entering that debate, it kind of reignites the passion and re-engages them with the modern day Socceroos, which is why I think it's actually a really clever marketing exercise to have this coincide with the games that we've been playing. So I actually think it's a massive tick. And I wouldn't be surprised if it may not be a team of the century function, but I wouldn't be surprised if leaning into nostalgia pre-John Aloisi's penalty might be a tactic that the FFA continues to use into the future in order to try and get lapsed fans to re-engage with the game. I thought it was very smart.
I mean, there are a few names in there which I guess are nods to the history, but if you're talking about Socceroos appearances, I mean, Alf Kuol, I just looked it up, played for the Socceroos twice. So I suppose that's a nod to their legacy in the domestic game. Same with Reg Date, who was a sort of legendary figure of, I guess, the pre-war era. But
yeah, like, I mean, if
you're saying, Josh, that when I put Grace Gill one cap in my Matilda's team of the century due to her media work, that will be totally justified.
Like if we're putting Aaron Moy in there as well, like, what about I know Tom Rogic's international career is polarized, but I mean, has Aaron Moy done more than Tom Rogic from an international standpoint to warrant selection? What about, I mean, it was such a short little burst, but what about Mas Luongo, as Geraldo said in the comments? I mean, look at what he did in the Asian Cup, for God's sake. He was like was he Ballon d'Or shortlisted? Like, after that as well? Like,
he was sort of shortlisted on a technicality because the player of the tournament had to be shortlisted for the Ballon d'Or.
An Asian Cup player of the tournament. Like, Jesus.
Just how beloved is Aaron Moy amongst the sort of Facebook smooth brain crowd? No, I'm serious.
Sorry. Remember when this podcast got called an elitist clique, and we scoffed at that notion? Well, sorry, Josh, but
I apologize to any Facebook users I may have offended in the process there. But no, I'm trying to make a serious point.
Elitist, Josh.
maybe my the way I expressed that was a little unkind, but
a Josh Parrish Count Dooku meme right there, you know.
Sorry, has the post? I know we've gone an hour and 14. Has the post show chat started, or are we still live?
Stick that on a t-shirt.
But Josh, on that point, I think it's all because people just look at the fact that he recently played in the Premier League.
That's what I was about to say.
I think that's literally it. Yeah, and
everything dissolved around me.
Like
You
he
know,
was pretty. Yeah, but still,
Aaron
yeah,
Moy
they-
being our most recent notable Premier League player still holds a very powerful position in the consciousness of quite a lot of, let's say, more casual observers.
Well, I'm getting a few messages about this chat with some other names, and they are Frank Farina, another name, probably actually he's sort of like his reputation sort of been sullied, I think, by his time at Sydney FC and the way he left the Socceroos, but he was a really good player for the Socceroos. And also Attila Abonyi, a name that you'll be very familiar with if you've read Joe Gorman's The Death and Life of Australian Soccer, Hungarian migrant, one of the first, a real superstar attacker for the Socceroos. So, yeah, some other names that have come through before Josh gets us cancelled.
Run Them Meme says smooth brain merch. Oh, that's exactly what we need. All right, let's move on swiftly to speaking of smooth brains, A-League fantasy, baby.
Far out, mate.
Let's
just going bang bang at the moment,
no,
Josh.
I'm
Jeez.
looking forward to showing off my own smooth brain when we get to the team that I've picked. But A-League's fantasy has launched, and to some fanfare, to some enthusiasm, to some take-up, finally we've got it back again after the old Fox Sports system died. It seems to be basically Sports Deck, but it's been slapped with Keep Up branding, and I, for one, welcome this new way to get actually invested in the week-to-week action.
I think it's fantastic because it's that auxiliary attraction that doesn't involve gambling, and
Yes.
it's something that non-fans that want to get involved or find a reason to compel themselves to get involved can get involved. I mean, I have not been an avid fantasy player. I signed up for She Plays last year, who do a great job on the A-League Women's, and finished 5th overall, might I add. But yeah, if not for the fixture chaos, I probably would have won. I carried a lot of zeros through the season. But I think that you look at the effect it's had on the AFL industry, and American and US sports, there's a far greater established culture of it. It's gone for decades now and is kind of an industry that almost supersedes the games itself at times for people. But I feel as though this has been, I would say, the best week since Keep Up launched for the site, and we need it.
100%.
I mean, there's 2 weeks until the season launches, and this is the magnet that would have dragged so many people in. So many people would have clicked around, seen the fixture, and actually got acquainted with the season. And all I can say is bravo, great move, and hopefully everyone jumps into the National Curriculum Public League so they can pit their wits against us. And Josh, the Smooth Brain crew are going to be coming for you, my friend. You'd want to win. Josh, you'd want to win.
Yeah. If Josh,
and you'd also want to name
Can
your
I
team
still-
Smooth
can-
Brain FC.
Yeah, can I still change the name? I don't know
Yeah,
if
you
I
can.
You can.
All right, I'm definitely changing my name.
Just on that, I mean, Taylor, you make a good point about how fantasy sport has sort of a grip, especially on the AFL community with Supercoach. Like, I mean, people love just the fantasy competition because it gives you also a reason. I mean, fantasy gives you also a reason to watch games. So it means eyeballs will be on because people want to see how their players go, and people actually get really emotionally invested in it, especially when, you got like a bit of bragging rights on the line as well. You're playing your friends and everything. I think it's a great little initiative. I think the only thing was I wish it started just a little bit earlier. I wish they'd given this a bit more time, maybe an extra 2 weeks. But I mean, look, I can't have any fault with it whatsoever in terms of having a fantasy competition. I'm just excited to see, I guess, how many people actually stick by and do it for the whole year. Because as we know, with so many fantasy Premier League players, they make a team for week 1 and then forget about it for the whole year. So let's see how many go for the whole season.
Well, I mean, the good thing about our league, the public league, will be kept account by the people competing against us. But I can also reveal here on TNC that you have the closed head-to-head league, and we are compiling our friends of the show, be they the occasional guests, some of them even with reputations for being cyberbullies, some of them who know ball, and we are going to announce the results, I understand, of our head-to-head league every weekend, almost like an update. And you talk about bragging rights and a reason to do it for the entire season. No one wants the wooden spoon in this league. Let me tell
And
you.
no
right
one
now.
wants to lose against Josh. Or actually, everyone wants to beat Josh now. I think that's just the target. Just don't let him win.
I'm just massaging my my heavily wrinkled, sizable frontal cortex here.
I think looking at fantasy, I think there's two things. One, PSA to everybody: do not DM or message players moaning about fantasy football. Do not do that. Just don't tweet at Croots. Don't message players about fantasy sports and all of that sort of stuff is one thing. But B, yeah, I think it's a very important thing because it also helps the A-Leagues move into a space which I think is something they really struggle with, not just in terms of, yes, it's great because it's going to get people watching games, which you want, and getting emotionally invested and intellectually invested in the games, but it's also going to get people invested in following the league between games during the week as well. You'll get, people wanting to know about who do they put in their fantasy team. They'll be listening in. They'll be searching out coverage surrounding coaches' press conferences, who's getting rested, who's injured, who's coming in, who's coming out, that sort of stuff, which is sort of the next step that the A-Leagues needs to take, getting people invested. I mean, look at the AFL. They have turned the naming of the squads on the Thursday into a major news event in and of itself. That's the kind of thing the A-Leagues need to start moving towards, not just getting people buying in and paying attention on game day, but following it week throughout the entire week and talking about it and discussing it and seeking it out. So, I think it is a really good move on that front. And this is when I once again do my cheap plug. I am at 95% of the Melbourne press conferences and we'll write them up. So if you need fantasy advice on the Melbourne teams, hit up jdlmedia.news.
I do have one criticism of this fantasy system, and that is because that is a very simple technical criticism that the teams don't format properly on mobile, and you cannot scroll shot, so you cannot physically screenshot your team and share it on social media.
It's the same on desktop. I'm trying to do it now and I can't.
Yeah,
You can't do it.
You're gonna have to zoom out, guys.
Well, you have to zoom out and crop out your goalkeeper, and that is a huge oversight because sharing your team is like a huge part of the online fantasy players experience. When you talk about EPL fantasy, for example.
Yeah, and there's talking about to go from an app that does it really well in terms of sharing. I'm in an NFL fantasy league on an app called Sleeper. And when you screenshot on Sleeper, it actually automatically is like this automated bit where it gives you the option. It's like, do you want to save it as this big, from top to bottom with your quarterback all the way down to your reserves, or do you want to just have it what's on your screen at that time? I know that maybe Keep Up doesn't have the logistics at the moment and sort of the app functions to do that, but I mean, that would be a nice little thing for them to maybe invest in. I mean, the Supercoach app doesn't allow for that either in terms of screenshotting on the mobile apps. You have to do it on the desktop, but they have actually, you mentioned it, you don't need to zoom out on Supercoach to actually get your whole team because they've kind of done well to fit it in your normal desktop. So, you know what, guys? I reckon what we need to do is we need to read our teams out. I reckon we need to get them out there, get them out to the masses, and I reckon we need to be held accountable for it as well.
A couple of things first, a couple of comments. Run the Memes helpfully pointing out that the national curriculum already has a Smooth Brain logo, which great shout. Alan Riley asking, does the D in JDL stand for Delbridge? Yes, can confirm it does.
No. It stands for Donnelly. My middle name is Donnelly. It's my mother's maiden name. Keep my mother's name out your mouth, Alan Riley.
And one thing is that thank goodness we got a conventional fantasy league and not what Danny Townsend mentioned on Twitter a long time ago, which is the fact that it was delayed last season because they were considering the possibility of incorporating like NFT or crypto elements into the fantasy. Thank God.
Viva
God we
LFE,
avoided.
utility for the token, utility for the fantasy football. One love, Viva LFE.
The only thing I'd love to see
Joey,
them do
are you putting on an accent? Because that's just how you normally talk, right?
Can I just say for next season, what I'd love for them to do, if they're going to evolve this, is incorporate a draft element as well. I think that's a nice little thing as well that you can just have. It's a nice little bit of fun when you get together with friends and do that. I reckon that'd be a bit of fun, yeah.
I'm glad we didn't get the London Fantasy Exchange, but I think all that's left to do is to read out our team. So who wants to go first?
Who's going first?
All right, I will whip through mine.
All right. Go, Taylor.
Joe Gauci in goals, Paulson backup, Jacob Farrell, Callum Talbot, Mario Williams, fresh from the NFL, and Aiden Simmons is my sleeper, and then Jordan Courtney Perkins as the sub. Midfield is where I've spent the most money. I might juggle this before round one. Nani, Davila, and Piscopo starting, and then Tulio and Kryev on the bench. I'll probably sell one of those for a cheapie. And then Cummings, Arzani, and Garansky as my starting trio.
So what you're saying, Taylor, is you're going to sell them for a cash cow? You're going to go full Supercoach terminology here as well?
I'm going to try and identify the minimum cost youngsters that are most likely to get game time. I don't think Aiden Simmons will necessarily be that player, but I was very impressed with what he did, funnily enough, for Sydney FC in the NPL. And a bit like Zach Sapsford, he has switched sky blue for red and black. So maybe that's indicative that he is closer to first-team football as a very sort of attacking, aggressive wing-back, the sort of player that will get forward and hopefully get those precious, precious goals and assists. So we'll have to wait and see.
All right, I'll go next.
Joey?
I am playing, I've switched up my formation, so I am playing a 3-4-3. But so starting goalkeeper, I have Lawrence Thomas. The backup, I have Philip Curto, so I will juggle those throughout the season. My starting defense, I have Dan Hall, Scott Jamison, Tomoki Imai, with Dylan Piraeus and Alex Wilkinson on the bench. My midfield, I have Craig Goodwin, who is also my captain, Reno Piscopo, Max Burgess, and Stefan Kolakowski, with Lee Broxham as the bench option. Forwards,
he'll be starting by the end of the season.
Yeah, I know.
He's starting on the
gonna,
bench, but he always comes in by the end.
Yeah, and he's just going to play somewhere regardless. Starting forwards, I have Jamie McLaren, Daniel Arzani as my vice captain, and Nick D'Agostino as the other starting forward.
Nice.
Do not mind it, Debano.
Okay, so I am going a 3-4-3. Now, the one thing that just before I get to my defenders to remember with this is the key with defenders are this is actual Craig Goodwin areas, but you want goals and assists with your defenders too. But before we get to that, Paul Izzo in goals and Brad Jones is the backup. Back three, for that reason, as mentioned, Ben Garuccio, Cadete, and Matt Miller starting, and then Dylan Piraeus and Aaron Gerd on the bench. Midfield four, Nani, Ulysses Davila, Riku Danzaki, Reno Piscopo, and Stefan Kolakowski on the bench. And up front, Jason Cummings, Daniel Arzani, and Chris Economidis, who at 172k is looking like an absolute bargain.
Ooh, I don't mind that. My team, I've got Michael Weir in between the sticks with Jack Duncan as the backup. So if Michael Weir goes down, his natural backup slides in there. Alex Popovich, Dan Hall, Tommy Murchella, who I thought was potential goal threat off set pieces, and Cadete as my four defenders. I'm playing 4-4-2, by the way. Benson and Hedges. And in midfield, Nani is my vice captain, Riku Danzaki, Reno Piscopo, and Max Burgess. Becker, Mikkel Tadze, and Ben Halloran up front. Becker is my captain. Hingett recently called up to the Sri Lankan national team. Jack Hingett is my defender on the bench. Stefan Kolakowski is my bench midfielder, and Al Hassan Toure is my backup striker.
So is Piscopo going to have 100% ownership across the entire league? It seems that price is irresistible.
Yeah, him and Danzaki, I think, are two potential steals for
mid-price gems. Mid-price gems are right there.
Gems. Burgess as well, but I don't know, what kind of output he's going to have.
I think D'Agostino is really cheap for the price as well, given that the price has been formulated on last season when he was sort of sharing with Margiotta for a lot of the season, but coming into this campaign, he probably will be the starting striker. So I think he might be undervalued as well.
My question is, how much of this comes down to football knowledge, and how much of it is just understanding algorithms, anticipating price changes, and basically being able to do the mathematics on price per point before the computer works it out, so you're ahead of the curve?
But also understanding break evens as well, because that's a big thing. You know, as you mentioned, Taylor, the prices, you want to get guys who are going to make you money, and then also players who are going to, you get on them when they're cheap, and then they're the when they drop in price. So that's why like getting someone like Craig Goodwin off the bat might not be too smart, because you can guarantee his price will at least drop at some point. So keep that in the back of your mind. Someone who finished top 2,000 in Supercoach a couple of years ago.
I don't know what's more impressive, top 2,000 in Supercoach or top 5 in
She
plays.
Mate, I think, look, Debano was up against hundreds of thousands of people, but I was up against true diehards who know their stuff.
That's true.
Yeah,
Probably the buy-in rate of those fans is a lot higher. All right, let us know your bargain picks, your top picks for A-League Fantasy.
Where people can join the leagues. We've posted the links, correct, Joey?
Yes.
On
The
Twitter?
link has been posted on Twitter. I will also drop... I'll tell you what, I have access to the YouTube comments. I will drop a link in the YouTube comments. We will update our Instagram bio at some point with the link to our leagues, and I will also put it up in the Facebook post. Yes, we actually are on all of those social media sites. We're just terrible at updating them.
What about our podcast bio, Joey? I reckon if you're listening on the pod, just get on the link.
Oh, yeah, it'll be in the episode description as well.
Yeah.
Shame on you, Teo, for your team name, by the way. Shame on you.
What? It's like a cycling team. It's got a sponsor.
Oh god! Oh, they're paying you for it. All right. We didn't actually go through that. Everybody. So, Teo, what's your team name?
My team name is the Gegan Podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. Best host.
Only host.
Debano, what's your team name?
Nick Datakare.
I like it.
Shout out in the comments if you can think up a better team name for Nick Debano. I'm sure some people can think of some
That's
ideas.
a good team name, man.
Josh Parrish, what's your team name?
Since this episode, Ed, my team name is FC Smoothbrain. So...
And my team name is Chiefs of Staff FC.
I think best team name as voted by us will receive some sort of moral victory. Maybe not a physical prize, but we'll definitely, once we get to the eve of the season, or maybe after round 1, we'll give a shout out to the best team names in the TNC league.
We'll see if ESPN can give us like a sticker or something to see.
I think this is Ben Smith's My Castro Romance. That's a really good one. And there's one from Daryl here called A Slice of Falami. And there's Gabenga Bus as well.
Gabenga Bus is great.
Yeah.
I like Cross and Ibusuki.
Yeah.
That's nice.
I don't mind it.
Yeah, I'll have a scroll through and compile my top ones so we can keep track of it. But
Yerman's Germans.
Love it. All right, get your fantasy teams in. Join the TNC League. Wow, what a league, as we've dubbed it, and we look forward to competing with you and updating you on the head-to-head league as well. Run Their Meme says Nick should be called Italy the England Relegators.
I don't think that fits
in
too
the
long.
character.
It wouldn't fit. It wouldn't fit in the character.
We'll find a way.
Are you trying to take this seriously? I mean, I doubt it. I think a completely ridiculous team name. Ridiculous. Terrible.
I feel like
ashamed of yourself.
At this point, NSD is like a placeholder topic in our run sheet every single time. But Joe, you had yet another NSD story come out. When are you going to stop banging that drum?
when they pull their finger out and introduce it. But no, yes. Latest in the NSD, flew up to Sydney and had a chat with James Johnson on the record, on camera, about numerous topics. The full conversation is actually available as a podcast on the TNC feed. So if you're listening to the podcast version of this, or you're in the comments and you want to hear about matters such as changes to dispute resolution, club licensing, a whole bunch of issues that don't sound too exciting on the surface level, but have the potential to have real ramifications for the entire pyramid, not just the top end of the game, I'd encourage you to seek that out. But yes, National Second Division. And the big headline was that having done their little roadshow and talking to various clubs about various costings and the like, James Johnson, on the record, declared that there was enough interests to forge ahead with introducing a National Second Division and commencing a expression of interest process now, the papers for which are currently being drafted up and finalised. Johnson wouldn't give a time frame as to when they would go out beyond as soon as they're ready, but he did put a time frame on saying that we will know who will be entering the first iteration of Australia's first ever national second division by mid-2023. That was the big headline to come out of that.
Joey, it's a credit to you for continuing to get the heavy hitters on the record, and now there's a clear timeline of what they're saying for people to follow. And it's not just that; it's in ESPN, credible media outlet, and host of this podcast, but the worldwide leader in sport. So it's not like you're writing it for a blog or putting it in Reddit posts here. However, I find that there's an undercurrent of counter narrative here, but no one's putting their name to it, and I just wonder. Why does it? Aussie Scout put out a tweet, I think the day after or 2 days after your article came out. The day after, sort of, refuting the claims without atting you, more or less. But what else are you going to refute? You're the one who had the most recent article on the record. Why is it that the counter narrative is still taking place in the shadows, and we're not getting those points from the alternative parties on the record? Would you even know where to go to find the people that are furnishing someone like Aussie Scout, again, who is anonymous? We're not here to expose people, operating anonymously for a reason. But why isn't the counter narrative willing to put their voice on the record in equal measure?
I mean, I think it's inevitable that I probably have spoken to people with the counter narrative, given that I have gone out and gotten comment from all the major stakeholders surrounding this. If you've looked at my articles over the past month or so surrounding the National Second Division, there's comment from the PFA, there's comments from the APL, there's comments from the AAFC, there's obviously comments from Football Australia, there's comments from potential participatory clubs. So there is, that's the thing, I cannot refute Aussie Scout's tweet simply because I don't know where it's come from. I don't know the biases behind it. I don't like that's the thing. Do I take, I just went out there and said, I've got all these people on the record. Do I take every single comment that I get on the record at face value? Absolutely not. I don't take anything I'm told on face value because inherently, at the risk of getting into, a metaphysical destructuring of our understanding of reality, everybody has their own inherent biases and their own inherent understandings of the situation, which is going to color their outlook. But that's why I get people on the record. So you've got James Johnson saying one thing, you can sit back and you can examine what is James Johnson, what is Football Australia's motivations, what do they stand to gain from this, what do they stand to lose? When you get the PFA on record, what do they stand to gain from this? What do they stand to lose? What are their previous positions on this matter that might be affecting this? What are some of the factors involved in that? That's why I've been insistent on going out there and getting as many people on the record as I can. Like I said, I can't refute what Aussie Scout tweeted out because it's, as you said, Tara, it's an anonymous account tweeting information from an anonymous source. I don't know their inherent biases. They could be, the source could be completely accurate. The source could be completely accurate based upon its current understanding, even though that might not even be accurate itself. So they might not be lying, but they might not also just have all the facts. I don't know that because I don't know who it is. So I think that's the important thing. And I did see, obviously there's an inherent desire to believe things that appeal to you. Like if you are inherently, doubtful of NPL clubs' ability to pay for a national second division, you're going to see something like that and go, aha, it's fine. And you might be 1,000% right. I don't know. But I like to think that a story with the CEO of Football Australia being on the record, on camera. I've stuck the entire thing up as a podcast so you can listen to the full conversation. So you don't even need to take my word for it. You can just listen to exactly what he said. should carry more weight. I don't think that should be controversial. Like I said, I'm not saying anybody is lying. I'm just trying to, yeah.
Well, another one of those guys who write for the Sydney papers coming through in the comments. Vince Rigari, guys, don't get too pressed by an unproven line from an anonymous account. Not worth this much oxygen. Solid reporting from Joey.
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess the thing is, Aussie Scout has it's an anonymous account, yes, but it got a huge amount of social traction, rivaling almost, I would say, the amount of traction your article got, Joey. Certainly, maybe not in terms of retweets and likes, but certainly in terms of comments and responses. So, if it was an account that got no interaction and we let it through to the keeper, sure, we'd ignore it. But I think it's more so that even from an anonymous account, there's an established level of credibility there, which hooks a lot of people in. And I do think most of the people that are negative about the National Second Division are people who aren't going to be interacting or participating with it once it starts. So I think, in a sense, Vince is right that we can just, let the naysayers nay, because if and when the league does start, they're not going to be the ones that are attending. They're not going to be the ones that are putting their hand up to work on it or be part of a club that's a member of it. So
I think I remember saying this on the podcast a few years ago. It's just, you can get information from everywhere. You can see information, and this goes for more than beyond sport. Just ask yourself where it's coming from. Do you know who it's coming from? Do you know where it's coming from? Do you know their inherent biases, their inherent views? Just ask yourselves the critical thinking. Just be critical of all the information that comes to you, all the opinions that come to you. Don't just agree with something because it looks good, just on the same way that, and I think everybody has been guilty of this, certainly on the National Second Division front, people in this don't also just attack sources because they disagree with you or because you don't like their perspective on things. Vince Rigari's been a target of that quite a lot, just because people playing the man, not the information. Don't do that either.
Well,
Just critical thinking.
I haven't been on for a few weeks, and I think you wrote the story and published the story, Joey, where you spoke to the three clubs. Was it South Melbourne,
Preston and Wollongong?
And Wollongong. I cannot believe the backlash Preston got for not being in the top NPL division. Hello, have you watched a single stream of their games? Have you seen the size of the crowds? They're outdrawing Western and MacArthur. I mean,
but also just
like
remember that.
There needs to be a vehicle. There needs to be a vehicle to embrace this team that is doing something phenomenal, and I just cannot believe the backlash it got from people.
And it's not like Preston's crowds are some sort of El Dorado that no one knows about unless you actually go to BT Connor Reserve and you don't have access to see it. I mean, Josh has been streaming all their home games for 2 years now, and has been
and they've got
home and away games.
They've got one of the best photographers in the country, Matt Johnson, taking photos of them.
Exactly.
So if you don't believe the stream, you got plenty of still photos too.
And if you don't have Facebook, I mean, there's been clips of it all over bloody Twitter as well, and every other platform. Like, it's not. No, even on 10 last year when there was a God forbid COVID outbreak there last year in the crowds. So
we had contact tracing.
It was contact. Like, seriously, I mean, I don't know. It does.
I think everything was done the legal way to be done. What else we can do?
But listen, I know, Josh, we've had a few questions coming through both on the live comments and responding to some of our tweets. Did you want to read any of those out? I can try to answer them to the best of my ability.
Well, I mean, firstly, thank you guys for saying that, because it rings a little hollow coming from me, the Preston Lions media manager. But I can't say it because who cares. But I feel a little bit vindicated. I was just rage scrolling through all those anti-press comments. How can you be in a National Second Division if you're not in the top flight? Give me a break.
Well, how can all the A-League youth teams be in a National Second Division if they're not in the top flight as well? Then, come on, let's go figure, guys. One of them didn't even get promoted from NPL 3.
And just to say, I've spoken to people at Football Australia. Preston is absolutely in the conversation, and they're impressed. This isn't just me, blowing, air up Josh's arse. No, people at Football Australia are impressed with what Preston does. It's a fact. It's fact, as Keske Honda would say.
Shotskis in the comments says, does James Johnson, genuinely believe in the NSD, or did he or whoever the CEO of today happened to be feel overwhelming pressure to act on a second division?
Does it matter? Does it matter?
I mean, he's just had his contract renewed and has come out and reinforced his commitment to it. You'd think that if it wasn't a KPI, he wouldn't have continued down the path he has.
And you also got to bear in mind, like, there's a lot of talk about we've got to fix the A-Leagues before we introduce the National Second Division. FA doesn't have anything to do with the A-Leagues anymore. Like, that's part of the divorce that Mummy and Daddy got. You know,
I think that is the easiest way to identify a concern troll. Where's the money coming from? Fix the A-League first. I mean, the people who say these things, you know, what's their actual motivation to try to help fix the top division, you know?
And speaking on, you know, anonymous lines and anonymous tweets, I mean, nothing gets more traction than you know, salacious in the know accounts with negativity. Because negativity burns through Twitter like wildfire. So it's always going to get more traction.
But people love negative stuff. Like people always preach about more positivity, but second is any negativity. People are like leeches to that stuff. Like literally, like they love it. They love anything to be negative about. Like it's a common fallback.
I've been trying to be more positive on Twitter as of late.
I'm not talking about you, Joey. Just talking about.
I know, but I'm just going to put that out there. Like, check my Twitter account. I've actually genuinely made an effort to be more positive these past few months.
Taurus asks, with the ever decreasing amount of football coverage in the press, how much coverage will the NSD in reality get in the media?
It's all about what platform they build for themselves, though.
Absolutely.
Well, and I also want to I'm going to answer this in a way that technically James Johnson wasn't speaking about the National Second Division when he was giving me this answer. It was the Australia Cup, but it gives a bit of an insight, I think, perhaps into his thinking. I asked him about the cut through that the Australia Cup has had this season. Obviously, everybody in the football family has been loving it, all the upsets, all the cup sets, all the drama, all the like. Hasn't had that much mainstream cut through to the extent that, you know, when I'm in the oncology day center or something like that, I'll still get nurses asking me, even the ones that are clued in about football, they will be asking me, oh, what's the Australia Cup? Oh, it's the FFA Cup, like that sort of thing. I asked James Johnson about that, and I think his answer was illuminative. He talked about how he had previously had disagreements, I want to say with Simon Pearce, but I can't remember that exactly, but he'd had disagreements in the past about how you market a product. And he was talking about how some others, you know, you've got to get the mainstream breakthrough and cut through and you've got to market it that way. James Johnson was talking about how he believed that you've got to get the product right first. You've got to create an authentic product and build it up from the base and satisfy your core customer before you start to expand the marketing, expand the reach and bring other people in. You want a solid underlying product. I think that perhaps, you know, maybe can give Taurus a bit of an insight into what sort of coverage the NSD might be hoping for under a James Johnson Football Australia. They won't be targeting massive mainstream free-to-air coverage. They'll be just trying to get it right and get its target core audience buying in, paying attention, clicking stories, reading content, sharing content, doing all of that sort of stuff, and try to let it grow organically, I think. And that maybe gets back to something that Nick Mykoussis, the South Melbourne president, said as well. People that want a second division, when it comes in, they'll have to put their money where their mouth is. They'll have to go to games. They'll have to click on stories. They'll have to share content. They'll actually have to, you know, start demonstrating that they wanted a national second division for reasons beyond using it as a cudgel to beat Football Australia.
Just very quickly, if you're still asking why doesn't XYZ in football get into mainstream media, basically you're giving yourself away as not having watched Media Watch for the last 2 years. And if you're watching this podcast, you should be able to watch Media Watch for 15 minutes a week as well. Paid placement has taken over the mainstream media industry. It doesn't matter if it's radio, television, or print newspapers. Basically, it is pay for access these days. Real news needs to be big news. You are not going to get anything other than national story sort of relevance. You know, the Queen dying into news without pay for access at this point. It's what the industry's become, and it's why the media is now so fragmented and scattered across many different platforms with many different people doing things like this to fill the void.
Well, from Preston Lions to Sterling Lions, then. Perth
Hold
Glory.
on. We did have one question that came through on Twitter from Andy Bluenose that I wanted to address. He tweeted to us, there's been scant news about Queensland participation / engagement during the NSD planning and consultation. Presumably, we'll see primarily a New South Wales and Victoria competition. Would love any insights. Well, Andy, I don't have any inside word on this, but based on a lot of the conversations I've had and reading the tea leaves, I think you're absolutely right. I think it will be primarily a Victorian and New South Wales competition, especially at the start when it is critical that you are finding clubs that are capable of financially supporting themselves and establishing a foundation so that it doesn't immediately fall over. It's all well and good to have a national second division with clubs in every corner of the country, but if half of them are unsustainable and fall over immediately, it's pointless. I don't necessarily think a national second division dominated by Victoria and New South Wales is even a bad thing. The A-Leagues are dominated by Victoria and New South Wales.
Look at the AFL. Look at the NRL. I mean, there's no South Australian or Western Australian representative in the NRL. And you know, when the AFL started in 1990 after rebranding from the VFL, they only had WA and Queensland in there for 3 years each and still didn't have South Australia either. So the two most successful, sustainable national leagues in the country aren't, and for a lot of their history, weren't actually national. You know,
and you look at the A-Leagues, there's only 2 teams to the west of Western United in the entire competition, Adelaide United and Perth Glory. I would think Adelaide...
And somehow both of them are in Western United's catchment area, which is amazing.
West of the West Gate. So, yeah, I think it is going to inherently be dominated by Victoria and New South Wales. 1, because that's where a lot of the population is. 2, that's where most of the money is. Like we talked about in the past, Ben Khan coming down from Queensland to Victoria, the well-trodden pathway from Queensland, NPL Queensland to NPL Victoria. Why does that happen? I'm making the hand thing for the taxes. The money, because the money, like Teo, I think you pointed it out. Victoria has the money
and the ambition.
Money and the ambition.
Yeah, well, that's
New South Wales.
Queensland has the players. Sydney has the stadiums. Victoria has the money.
Can I just say, just on that, having spoken to Ben Card earlier this week, like that was exactly, if you want to quote from the horse's mouth, he literally said it. Melbourne Knights have aspirations. That is what was such a big pull, and there was the opportunity to test myself in a better league, in a more competitive league, and also the lure of coaching Melbourne Knights and the potential carrot that's being dangled on top of it. It's too much of a good opportunity to turn down, despite the shortfalls of Melbourne Knights on the field over the last few years.
And then the eventual goal has, for the national second division, national second tier, whatever they call it, is inevitably going to be, as soon as feasible, at the very minimum, connections with the NPL via promotion and relegation based upon performance and meeting certain standards. And then at that point, absolutely, you'd be hoping that, these Queensland clubs, these South Australian clubs, these Western Australian clubs, Tasmanian clubs, Northern Territorian clubs, having seen that the national second division is sustainable, it's not going to bankrupt them if they try to enter it, can put together a roadmap, can put together a plan, and gain promotion to the second tier at that point.
Well, I'm going to reuse my segue because Joey interrupted me last time. From Preston Lions to Sterling Lions, Perth Glory will be forced to play 10 out of 13 home games at Macedonia Park after HBF Park was rendered unavailable for an additional 6 home games beyond the original 4 that were planned. This is due to ongoing and delayed stadium renovations, and therefore Perth Glory, needing a rectangular venue, have turned to Macedonia Park.
So,
I
clarify-
don't stand by this banner choice, by the way.
Yeah, I'm a conscientious
neither.
objector to the banner.
Yeah,
Now,
same here.
does this? I must have glossed over this. Does this mean that we're not changing the date of any of Perth Glory's home games, just the venue, and we're not flipping any of their home games to away games and vice versa? I.e., we're not changing what city each team plays in per the original fixture released.
I believe that is
There already are some fixtures that have been
Yeah.
flipped.
Didn't their first home game get flipped to Gosford?
Right.
Wait, no,
so,
not Gosford. There was one game that got flipped. It wasn't. I don't know if it's got. Who are they playing first game? Was it Central
the
Coast,
original
or was it-
first 2 home games have been rescheduled for later in the season.
Ah, yeah.
I-
They're playing
So
Western
because they have
Sydney,
to
match
they
day
have to
one.
do some upgrades.
I'm glad they've found a solution because, as I said last time we discussed this, minimal disruption to flow-on effects, i.e., flipping homes and aways, is the thing we wanted to avoid. If it's a Perth problem, let Perth own the problem and isolate it to one team, because the last thing you want is the same issue that we had last season with, were we playing tonight? I didn't know. You don't want to create that feeling in every city because Perth has a knock-on effect of having to switch home and aways and so forth. So credit to Perth for finding a solution. It's a shame we didn't get the fixture locked in because it was one of the key pillars we were hoping for the A-League men's season, but at least they have minimised the damage.
The thing that I feel sorry for Perth fans in the sense that like their first 5 games of the season are now on the road and they'll play one home game before the break. That's on the 13th of November. So again, it's a third straight season of disruption for Perth Glory's home support that they have to wait for all these home games. I know that they'll be backlogged and everything else, but I think there would be an element of disappointment. You know, COVID's and WA's locked borders are not a thing. Well, COVID's still a thing, but WA's locked borders are certainly not a thing anymore. But yeah, it would have been good for them to have sorted this out a while ago. And the fact that we're 2 weeks out from the season, or a couple of days, we're going to go announced to about 2.5, and they're only announcing it now is, I think, a bit disappointing. But I mean, at least better late than never. At least it's not 3 days out from the season, and Perth Glory don't even know where the hell they're playing their first game.
Well, I'm hoping that due to it, well, I suppose the upgrades are going to factor into the cost, but Perth Glory have had the most expensive tickets for a long time, and I'm hoping that if there are any savings by playing at Macedonia Park, the savings are passed on. Interestingly, Neil Sherwin of BP Football reporting, no memberships will be available for Glory's 10 games at Macedonia Park. With the quote, please note that due to limited seating options at Macedonia Park, member seating is unfortunately not available, with tickets being the only option at this venue. I mean, why couldn't they have done a GA membership?
I think because they might have already sold more memberships than they can
Then
potentially.
capacity, yeah.
Yeah. They'll be refunding people that have already
They've
bought
got to
memberships.
refund people.
Yeah.
But, I mean, what joy.
I mean, it's sort of one of those situations where like it sucks, but they got to do it. What's the alternative?
How many people can they fit when it's all the temporary seatings? It's 7,500. I think it is.
Look, seeing a full stadium is still going to be pretty good, regardless of the TV pictures, if nothing else.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean,
yeah.
I did speak with Stefan Kolakowski about this, and he said, yeah, it really sucks that we're going to have to be on the road. We've got a new squad. We're trying to get connection, but it's going to be really awesome with a really pumping atmosphere when we get, thousands of people, packed around the stadium, and it's going to be a really awesome atmosphere, and he can't wait to play in it. So,
yeah, it's going to be the Cartman Land effect, hopefully.
Yeah, well, it kind of reminds me that the best example is you think back to Lower Hutt, Wellington Phoenix playing those games, what was it, 2014, 2015, and they put in all those temporary seating, and I think they played a game against the Jets or something. It looked awesome on TV because you had everyone just packed and they were on these temporary seats, and it almost gave like a bit of a lower league, League One, League Two, in England kind of feel. Like everyone was really tight knit. It's 6,000 or 7,000 people. I mean, if they can get something like that every week and they're selling out, it looks good on TV. There'll be a decent atmosphere. It's disappointing it won't be at HBF Park, but I mean, 6,000 or 7,000 HBF Park looks a lot worse than what it does at Macedonia Park.
Apparently, Macedonia Park was used by the Perth Kangaroos, who were the forerunners to Perth Glory in the early 90s. So hopefully they get a kanga chant going. No takers. Okay. Well, unfortunate for the Glory after some disappointing years to have to be relocated, but at least we've got a consistent venue. Let's move on. We're fast approaching the 2 hour mark, so I'm tempted to skim through the rest of the rundown. I want to talk young Matildas, Teo.
Very quickly. Yeah, just want to say how exciting it was to see this squad. If you have not tuned into A-League Women's yet this season, this is a new cycle from the coach Leah Blaney. It's basically a who to watch for the coming season ahead. So go through the list of names, acquaint yourself with the players. Some of them are allocated to A-League Women's clubs. Some are heading to clubs but just haven't been announced yet. But I just want to say that more than a few times, I feel as though it's my own fault for watching the games and accumulating knowledge when it comes to national team selection in the women's space. I did not feel that today. In fact, I felt as though it was a really great reflection of who's been a standout in NPL Victoria and New South Wales in particular. I don't follow the other NPLs quite as closely. I keep an eye on South Australia, not so much on Queensland because there's a divide between the Football Brisbane Premier and the NPL up in Queensland in the women's, with some raw players playing in the Football Brisbane instead of the NPL. But you know what? This team has some great talent. If you don't know the names, you'll get to know them over summer watching the A-League Women's. And big thumbs up after the disappointment of going out in the group stage at the Under-20 World Cup, where, fair enough, we lost to one semi-finalist and we lost to the runner-up. So we were beaten by two very good teams. I think that this new cycle, renewed optimism, and all the best to the players and the coaching staff.
One or two players to watch?
Claudia Chico, Arpia Leichhardt, yet to be announced in A-League Women's. And I think
centre backs, Chico?
Right back or a short centre back, and another defender who Joey has seen a lot more of firsthand, Silver Bell Morris, who has signed for Western United, and also Ava Breedis, who signed as a train-on for Melbourne Victory. I mean, everywhere you look, there's potential. I was really happy to see Heidi Dennis in this team from Brisbane. She was a train-on at Raw last season, but has been in a code war with rugby sevens, where apparently she's just as good, if not better, at rugby than at football. But a very well-informed Queensland source told me that they thought Heidi Dennis was the best youngster at the Raw. So great to see her getting picked in as the maybe the next Elise Perry or Jenna McCormick that we have, or Ellie Brush, that we have to battle with another code in order to get her to choose football. So, hey, lots to watch.
Is that an international tug of war or an international ruck?
Well, it's a scrum. That's what it is. I mean, rugby sevens is a sport I don't follow, but you can see the world. You can go to the Olympics. I think it's actually a bit of an underrated sport, competing directly with the things football offers you, as opposed to what cricket or Aussie rules would offer you.
Any burning points to make before we wrap to tonight's show?
I had a quick thing that I wanted to say. Email just hit my inbox, and I feel like it merits a shout out. At the Night of Nights for Para Football, the 2022 annual Para Football Awards, Daniel Campbell and goalkeeper Caitlin Smith have taken out the Player of the Year prizes for the men's and women's para football. Campbell, part of the men's Pararoos team, scored a hat-trick at the recent World Cup. He was also the Young Pararoo of the Year back in 2018. Caitlin Smith, she's from Perth. She was part of that first ever Para Matildas squad that went to the World Cup and finished as the silver medalist. So that's another bunch of award winners there, but congratulations to Daniel and Caitlin on taking out the two major gongs.
Debano, anything final from you? Any plugs? Any cheap plugs?
Oh, before I get to a cheap plug, all I have to say is, because I did say I was going to mention it, hey, Joey, how does it feel losing against the Minnow and being relegated from the top tier of the Nations League? The good thing is...
I think there's a problem with your microwave, Nick. You keep breaking up.
This is just.
Speaking of the Nations League, my alarm goes at 3:30 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Hurry
So
up.
make sure you make sure you get up and you watch the Nations League live and exclusive on Optus Sport.
Yeah. See England continue their relegation fodder. As Antonis actually put in the comments, if you want to ask anyone about a national second division, we can ask England because they're going to be in the second division of Europe now. So how great
Well,
is
I'll tell you
that?
what. I'll also
I
we
mean,
had another comment.
Joey, how
come
much
through.
mainstream media coverage can the England national team expect now that they've been relegated?
Trust me,
tell
bro.
you what.
They're scoring
To-
goals
to-
in trading. They're going to win eventually, guys.
To answer another question, the tweet that came through, Matt Coleman asking what I was going to be up to in Qatar during the World Cup. Probably pretty much everything, Matt. A lot of plans in Qatar, a lot of plans for TNC as well during the 2022 World Cup. So get prepared to see a lot more of our faces, a lot more of our friends' faces during the Qatar World Cup. I think I've just pulled a Taryn there and just informed all of our friends that they'll be involved during the World Cup without actually letting them know yet. But I'm very much looking forward to that. Very much looking forward to actually getting out there in Qatar and seeing the Socceroos play, seeing them play, and looking for the Italian team bus in Qatar that won't be there because they didn't qualify.
Joey, which Nations League C team do you think will give you the best chance of promotion? Do you want Turkey, Greece, who lost to Cyprus, Kazakhstan, or Georgia?
Bang! That is great.
You know, if things get too difficult, I guess the Premier League can just buy Serie A. What's it worth at this point? You know, $20 on a hot dog. You know, we can sort something out.
Yeah, but our teams are still out playing England, so it doesn't even matter. That's a story for another day. No, in terms of cheap plugs, I actually have a story. We talked about Keep Up a little bit earlier. I actually have a story going out later this week on Melbourne City and their academy. Had a chat to Michael Petrillo and Simon Zapier last week, so keep an eye on that. Literally, keep an eye on that and keep up with it when it comes out on Keep Up later this week.
I will have a story with Steve Corica, hopefully coming out tomorrow, surrounding Sydney FC's rebuild, his thoughts on his tenure, his philosophy, his change in system, some words on Milos Ninkovic's departure, and that should be a podcast up on the TNC podcast feed as well.
And don't forget the WSL continues week 2. Assists for Steph Catley and Caitlin Ford in Arsenal's 4-0 win against Spurs. Last night, Sam Kerr for Chelsea versus Alana Kennedy and Hayley Razzo for Man City is overnight into tomorrow morning, and it is all live and exclusive on Optus Sport. I don't have any... I'm in a stretch, fellas, where I think I'm commentating one game in 5 weeks. I'm going to get the shakes. I'm going to be sitting here at home just talking to myself at this rate. So thank you.
You'll be commentating your every movements, Teo. Walking down the street, you're going to be...
yeah, it's going to be the Peter Griffin running commentary. So
it's like a seagull lands in front of him. Oh, seagull, get out of here, seagull!
Hopefully TNC can tide me over for the next couple of weeks at least.
Oh, I may have a cheap plug next week, but not to be announced yet.
Oh, before we go, who's our tip to win the Australia Cup next Saturday? Because obviously we'll review it next Sunday, but who's our tip to win?
Let's go behind the strong home crowd. I'm going with Sydney United.
Look, I think
MacArthur.
Sydney United winning would be the best thing for the Cup, but it's on the exposed form. I've tipped against Sydney United pretty much every step of the way, except for when they played Brisbane Roar. So I think that MacArthur will be too strong.
Daniel Arzani to, have a good game. MacArthur.
Debano?
Yeah, MacArthur wins. Daniel Arzani wins Mark Viduka medal.
All right, so I'm the lone real football.
Honestly, I'd love Sydney
here.
United to win. It'd be a great story, but I have this feeling the luck might run out. So sorry
I
to be
just
the
think
downer.
Crow Cup that weekend, big
True.
crowd turnout.
True.
I think they could punish them. There's a few defensive foibles in that MacArthur team. They just gotta somehow survive against that attack.
Mate, they've got one of the best NFL defensive linemen of the last 10 years in that team.
A former number 1 pick.
As
Mario
exclusively
Williams.
revealed by me for ESPN.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Smooth Brains.
Thanks and success.
Thanks and success, and we'll talk to you again next week.